Good afternoon and welcome to this Bipartisan Policy Center web event on the release of our newest report on immigrant entrepreneurship, economic potential, and obstacles to success. We welcome those of you who are very familiar with the Bipartisan Policy Center and those of you who may be encountering us for the first time. We are, as the name implies, a bipartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. We cover many issues, and our desire is to bring the best ideas for both Republicans and Democrats together to find areas of consensus to help move forward policies that can help America be a better country. And to that end, immigration is one of those areas that we have been working very hard on for the last several years. My name is Teresa Cardinal Brown. I am the Managing Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the BPC, and I am happy to be your moderator for today's event. We think we know a lot about immigrant entrepreneurship. If you walk down your neighborhood streets, you're likely to see many shops or stores or restaurants that are owned or operated by immigrants. They have been part of our history and culture for many, many years, but there's something to be said for understanding that a little bit more. And so with the help of some of our funders, we have dived into this idea of immigrant entrepreneurship, who they are, what we know about them across the country, what kinds of businesses they invest in, but more importantly, what are some of the obstacles and hurdles to their success in the United States? We are looking forward to diving into this today with four fantastic panelists who I will introduce to you right now. First of all is Cristobal Ramon, who, for those of you who have been following immigration at BPC for a while, is a familiar face and a familiar voice from our This Week in Immigration podcast. Chris is a global and U.S. immigration policy researcher and analyst. He has as a migration policy consultant to organizations such as the Migration Policy Institute, the George W. Bush Institute, the Episcopal Church's Office of Government Relations, the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, and the Bipartisan Policy Center. And he is one of the co-authors on this report that we will be presenting today. So thanks to Chris. Next, we have Christina Da Silva. She is Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Officers for the city of Dallas, Texas. Originally born in the Republic of Panama, Christina has worked to promote equitable access and opportunities for immigrants and their families for the past 10 years. She currently manages the City of Dallas's Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Division, where she leads policy and programmatic efforts to make Dallas a more welcoming city for immigrants. Next, we have Dane Stangler. Dane is Director of Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. He works on our business and entrepreneurship and other related projects at the BPC. He was previously a BPC Fellow. He's also a Senior Advisor at the Global Entrepreneurship Network. And prior to joining BPC, he was President and Chief Policy Officer at Startup Genome. He has been also Vice President of Research and Policy at the Kauffman Foundation, which has done a lot of foundational research on entrepreneurship in the United States. Last but not least, somebody who's having a bit of technical difficulties joining us, hopefully he will be on, is Adrian Bota. Adrian is the co-founder and CEO, there he is, glad to have you, Adrian, of Origin Milk. Adrian is committed to leading the shift away from big dairy, which is relying on legacy cows, to a regenerative, organic, always local model of clean dairy. That's his business. But his roots in farming go back to his father working on a farm in Romania, because he is also an immigrant to this country. So we look forward to hearing from Adrian today. But as we get started, we want to start with the report. So we're going to go back to Chris. Chris, as the one of the principal authors on the report, can you just give us an overview of the report, how the research was done, and what the key findings and recommendations are?
Yeah, thank you so much to everybody. Thank you, obviously, Teresa, for having me back here. It's always nice to be at the institution that helped really launch and strengthen my career. So thank you, everybody. So our report was really our effort to really get a sense of who immigrant entrepreneurs are, why they become immigrant entrepreneurs, the obstacles that they face, the way policymakers have responded to these obstacles, and then policy recommendations. Our research was a combination of looking at studies on immigrant entrepreneurs, but also doing interviews with individuals, policymakers, researchers, and nonprofits that work with immigrant entrepreneurs to get a little bit more granular detail on what it is that these individuals experience. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about why they become immigrant entrepreneurs down in this conversation, but just sort of three core areas of findings. One is that immigrant entrepreneurs, start businesses at higher rates than other individuals. The Kauffman Foundation this past March just released a report that found that immigrant entrepreneurs are about 580 individuals for every 100,000 adults. Native-born Americans are about 320 individuals who are entrepreneurs for every 100,000 adults. And we have an entire page of these stats in the report. But I think that gives you a sense of the fact that these are individuals who are starting businesses at higher rates. And they're starting businesses across a whole host of industries. When we were doing the interviews, we heard some interesting stories about the Syrian immigrant in the St. Louis area who started a soap factory. We heard about an immigrant from Europe who started her own solar panel manufacturing business in Massachusetts. And that kind of gives you a sense of the way that these businesses can span a whole host of industries. When we talk about what the obstacles are for immigrant entrepreneurs, there are two core findings that we found. One is that our immigration system doesn't have a proper immigrant entrepreneur visa, and neither does it have a status for individuals who are already here, probably on an H-1B visa, for instance, or a student visa, to adjust status. We do have the Eb5 Investor Program, but that's really designed for individuals who are coming in with a significant amount of funding to be able to put into a business here in the United States. It doesn't necessarily align with the way immigrant entrepreneurs either need venture capital funding for a high-tech startup, or individuals who want to start a mainstream business. So it is an important program, but it's not a substitute for immigrant entrepreneurial visas that we need. Another core issue that these individuals struggle with is sometimes accessing, capital to be able to start their businesses. A lot of entrepreneurs, and Dane, obviously, I appreciate his feedback on this report, is that a lot of folks do come in with their own funding, but if you need funding down the road, if you don't have a credit history because you're a newcomer, if you don't know how to navigate the system because you're a newcomer, those can be problematic barriers to be able to access those resources. And in terms of the responses and recommendations, we have seen both Democrats and Republicans propose legislation to create an immigrant entrepreneurial visa and obviously an immigrant entrepreneurial status to adjust to here in the United States. Unfortunately, we have not seen Congress pass any of this legislation. So one of the first recommendations is that Congress absolutely needs to pass legislation to create these pathways. Another thing is that, we spoke with what municipalities are doing with immigrant entrepreneurs. And I think the key thing here is they're doing a lot of great work, ranging from technical assistance to providing funding. But, in terms of recommendations, ending duplicative services and having services targeted at the specific needs of immigrant entrepreneurs and other minority groups, offering services in key languages, including recognizing languages can change in a metropolitan area or rural area or exurb, suburban, that can shift. And finally, just ensuring that you're actually doing good faith outreach to immigrant entrepreneur and marginalized communities with trusted navigators. So those are sort of the key findings. I think one last thing is that we don't have great data on immigrant entrepreneurs, so we need to beef up those resources to really understand the economic impact of these folks and the ways that policies can better assist them in starting their own businesses.
Thank you, Chris, so much for that summary of the report. I'm going to turn now, because you ended with municipalities, so let me turn to Christina now and her work at the City of Dallas. Christina, tell us about your work for the city, and why does the City of Dallas seek to help immigrant entrepreneurs, and what are some of the programs that you have put in place to do so?
Thank you, Teresa, for this opportunity. So again, I'm the Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Division Officer for the City of Dallas. And it's exciting to share our journey that we've gone through as a community to recognize not only that immigrants play a big part of our community, they play a big role in our economic development. So about 5 years ago, we recognized immigrants were actually about 24% of our Dallas resident population. And so as a local government, we wanted to partner with local community groups and leaders to support welcoming and integration of immigrant residents that were choosing Dallas as their home. So as part of that process, we actually developed the Welcoming Dallas Strategic Plan that included recommendations and goals that were collaboratively written with our community partners and then ultimately shared with our city council. The city council actually adopted this Welcoming Dallas Strategic Plan as a city resolution. So it's actually part of our local policy to be a welcoming city. And within that Welcoming Dallas Strategic Plan that was adopted, we actually have 5 pillars. One is leadership and communications, which includes ways that our city, our local government, is going to be using their platform to increase awareness about the role that immigrants play in our community. Safe and healthy and connected communities, working with law enforcement and also health institutions to support access to health and safety resources. Equitable access, as mentioned earlier about language access, this is a big part of that, but also looking at what are some of the other systemic barriers that we could be addressing as a local government to increase access to opportunities. Civic engagement is also another big area. We are actually hosting a naturalization ceremony tomorrow at City Hall. And so that's one of our ways that we uplift civic engagement and also naturalization for our Dallas residents. And then finally, we have our pillar of education and economic development, where we identify that as a local government ways that we want to support workforce opportunities for immigrant and refugee residents, and then also how we can increase access to opportunities for immigrant entrepreneurs. All of these efforts, of course, are done in close partnership with our local nonprofit agencies, business institutions, about 100 different members that are actually on our welcoming task force that advise our work. And in fact, our efforts have actually been nationally recognized. Dallas is actually the first welcoming city that is certified by Welcoming America.
Christina, thanks so much. That's really great to hear the work that Dallas is doing. Dane, I want to turn to you. We'll go back to sort of a national level. You've done obviously a lot of research and you were a key advisor for our report, but tell us, why is it so important for the United States to support and encourage immigrant entrepreneurs?
Thanks, Teresa, and thanks for including me in this event. It's great to be on here with Chris and Christina and Adrian and you. Let's make a couple of points. Chris alluded to a couple of the reasons why it's important to support immigrant entrepreneurs. First, at a high level, when it comes to entrepreneurship in general in the United States, so the creation and growth, and sometimes shrinkage and exit of new businesses, those young firms, firms that are 1, 2, 5, up to 10 years old, account for really the majority, well beyond the majority of net new jobs that are created every year in the U.S. economy. So we all know, millions of jobs are created every year. Millions of jobs are, economists say, destroyed, but that's a terrible way to describe it. But millions of jobs are go away, right? They're not filled. They're obsolete. What's left over between that gross job creation and gross job destruction is that net addition to the U.S. economy every year. And entrepreneurs are responsible for the lion's share of that net new job creation. Now, over the last 15 years, especially pre-COVID, the new business creation rate in the United States at an aggregate level had been pretty much flat. It really plummeted during the global financial crisis and Great Recession, and it never really recovered. It actually did recover during COVID, but for some reasons having to do with the pandemic. And as Chris mentioned, immigrants have a much higher entrepreneurial propensity than native-born Americans. So even as the overall rate of entrepreneurship in the US was flat for those 12, 15 years pre-COVID, the rate of new entrepreneurial activity that Chris mentioned that the Kauffman Foundation publishes was rising, was very high and was rising. In some years, it was about double the native-born American rate. So at a high level, entrepreneurship is key for our economy, for job creation, for innovation, for vibrancy of local economies. And immigrant entrepreneurs over the last 10 to 15 years have been the force that's kept our business creation rate really from falling any further. And they've been, have a disproportionate responsibility for the job creation, the innovation that we've seen. So they're important not just for overall entrepreneurship, but for that local economic impact of really propping up that job creation process at the macro level.
Thanks so much. So last but not least, Adrian. Adrian, we mentioned your company, Origin Milk, but tell us about your personal immigrant journey and what prompted you to become an entrepreneur and start your own business. And in particular, how did your past as an immigrant shape the business at Origin Milk?
Thanks for having me. Really glad to be on with all the other panelists as well. So the immigrant drive that has been alluded to already is one where people are looking for the opportunity to do something that perhaps there isn't room for or infrastructure for or ability to do in many other countries. And the US certainly has been a country that's laid the foundations for generations that enable entrepreneurs to do what they do, to innovate, to address issues that are unmet in the market, to look at turning things in a different way, engineering, reverse engineering, or again, innovating in a way that is additive and value added to others and to the community and the economy as a whole. And so the reason immigrants have this, I believe, have this drive is because of a lack of opportunity for that ambition to be explored and or implemented in many other countries where entrepreneurship isn't valued, frankly, as much as it is here. And it does have something to do with that individualistic, the individualism that we seek. And that has, that's kind of a double-edged sword. That's a beautiful thing when you want to put your ambitions to work, to innovate in a space where there's an unmet need. And it's more difficult to navigate perhaps when you've got to consider the community as a whole. But I think that entrepreneurs are seeking the opportunities that are wide open here in the US. And those, again, lay the groundwork, the foundation, and the infrastructure to allow things to happen, such as education. And that education opens up one's mind to possibilities or opportunities or ways that we can address issues in creative ways where perhaps others haven't thought of it, but also things such as access to capital markets, which in so many other countries, there isn't an infrastructure to enable this. So whether it's venture capital or angel investors or private equity, or even government grants and funding. And so I think what immigrants are absolutely looking for is the opportunity or the possibility to dream, and then to see that dream come to fruition, to not have people holding them back. Entrepreneurs, we face the word no on a regular basis, all the time. When I speak to other entrepreneurs, the one characteristic that I think that is the absolute most important is resilience. It's the ability to hear the word no and just to keep going and say, all right, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but you're probably wrong, and I'm just going to keep going and until I get a yes. And if you can do that over and over again, you probably have what it takes to be an entrepreneur. And so many of us will fail all along the way. And I say this all the time: we're either building that airplane as we're crashing, or we're just failing our way like constantly every day until something sticks and it works and the right pieces of the puzzle come together. But there are a lot of pieces that need to come together. As I mentioned, just a few of those, such as education or capital or timing, or an open, a market, people that are ready, willing, and able to have certain things. If you think about the American economy, the way that it's structured, and the way we are as Americans, we've become, for good or bad, we've become very comfortable, and we expect certain things to happen. My father said very early on to me when we came to America, I was doing something, I'm not sure, I was a child, and I was trying to fix something or unfix something, who knows. And he said, you're trying too hard. In America, if it's too hard, you're probably not doing it right, because we just make everything more simple. So you think about all the things that, I have this idea. How can I make this one little thing more simple? And boom, that becomes a $100 million idea. And in many other countries, that's simply not the case. And so that's presented here. And so when my background, or my personal background, is that my father had an entrepreneurial spirit, in that he took his family, he took 5 children, including an infant, and crossed the border illegally out of communist Romania in 1989. And you have to have an entrepreneurial spirit that is willing to risk, and that is willing to hear a lot of people say, no, don't do that. That is a bad idea. That is not going to end well. Because if you're caught, we all know what could potentially happen. And so he obviously had that in him, in a country where every single business was run by the government, right? It was a complete communist economy. So anyone and everyone that was doing any sort of enterprise, it was state-owned. And so he came with that background, and very quickly saw the opportunities available for him in America. And so he went and redid his education and recertified and all these other things, and got the regular job. But then, of course, started a real estate business on the side, because that's just what he had to do. It was just part of what he wanted to do. And so entrepreneurship ran in his blood, even though he couldn't really implement it in a way that we would think of regular entrepreneurship in a communist country, because you couldn't do that. And so his first act of entrepreneurship, again, was escaping that communist country, taking that risk and investing in something for the future, and then coming here and building a business. And then us looking at him as children and wanting to emulate some of those same things, and looking at what we really want to get out of the opportunity we had to be brought here in the US. And for me, it was looking at great institutions that were built. And I've always drawn to large corporate interests, or large companies, multinationals, and I was always drawn to the government and potential government work. And I had a chance to have an internship at Pfizer, and then move to New York City and be involved in working there, and then on Wall Street, and then in consulting, et cetera. And I saw this behemoth, these behemoth industries. And I thought, and what drove me to entrepreneurship was that, while it's really exciting and very interesting, an entrepreneur really gets to pave a new path. And I thought that that being part of a larger institution, my work or my ambition or my thoughts were really getting lost. You're one of 150,000 people, let's say, at Pfizer. And so what drove me to entrepreneurship was the idea of filling an unmet need, innovating in a space like dairy and nutrition, which is what our ultimate goal is. We're in this dairy world to get to the nutrition world, and looking at things like infant formula and toddler formula, which most of us here can say that, I've been reading about that in the news lately, and we've been working on this for 4 years now, and it's still something, it's becoming very apropos in today's environment with the shortages, but looking at space and unmet need, and wanting to fill that unmet need, looking at an opportunity, and being told by others not to do it. So I'll end with this story that I think we can all sort of relate to. Is when we had this idea, there were a few different things that we had to go through regulatory wise. And we approached some other people in the business, in the dairy world, in the nutrition world, who had been at it for a number of years. And I asked them, well, do you guys realize what you have here? We have this opportunity to do this. Have you thought about it? And they said, oh, absolutely. No, great. So what have you done? So, well, first of all, we went to the government because we need approval for these things. It's regulatory. There's a regulatory framework. And I said, great. What did they say? Well, they said, absolutely not. So government authorities said, no, that can't be done. It hasn't been done that way before. It would take a lot of time, a lot of money, but we wouldn't approve it, et cetera. I said, all right, great. What else did you do? He said, well, we've also spoken to attorneys. Okay, what did the attorneys say? Well, they said, no, you can't do it because there's this company out of Australia, New Zealand that has these trademarks and patents and this and that, and then you can't do it. And so I look at them as, 29-year-old or whatever. I look at them and say, wait a second. And I come from a communist background. I said, wait, you're telling me that the government said no, and then lawyers said no, and you stopped? And they said, well, yeah, of course. Well, what else would you do? And I guess as an entrepreneur, I said, ding, 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 ding. Well, look, if government bureaucrats and attorneys tell you not to do something, then I think categorically you should absolutely go for it and do it. There is an opportunity there. And I think others with that type of background that have been held back, in a certain system, will see something like that and say, yes, ding, 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 go, 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 when perhaps others would say no. And it's great because we have the infrastructure, again, here in the US to support that. And it's sad to know or to think that whatever administration has come and gone, we see that the opportunities are not where they should be. There's so many more people that could be coming and adding, being value add from various countries that are, literally dying to get here, that have ideas that we can't even fathom today. That we're so lucky to be able to have folks like that wanting to come here as opposed to anywhere else, and they can build that foundation and take it who knows where here in the US.
Adrian, thank you so much for that. Your enthusiasm definitely shines through. I want to let our audience know that we will have room for audience questions at the end. If you're following us on YouTube, feel free to throw a question up in the YouTube chat and our folks will call those for us. You can also post a chat via Twitter. A question via Twitter. You can tag at BPC_bipartisan or the hashtag BPC Live. And again, those questions will be filtered in so we can have room for those at the end. But to continue our conversation a little bit, Chris, you heard Adrian talk a lot about why he feels that immigrants frequently become entrepreneurs. Why do you think that is? Are there other reasons that you found from your research? And why also do you think our immigration system right now doesn't specifically recognize immigrant entrepreneurs as a category for immigration?
Yeah, no, Adrian hit actually the three core points of what we found under research. One, immigration is an entrepreneurial act. It's incredibly risky. Look, if you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to go from San Francisco to New York, and that's already a risk. Imagine you going from another country to one where you may not even have ties. That already puts you in a position where you're already open to risk. It's funny because my dad is an immigrant from El Salvador, and he always had one saying, which is "Abre la boca en este país," which literally means open the mouth, but it's literally to hustle and to take advantage of the opportunities that exist here, irrespective of the risks you may face. So that's point number one. Point number two is that individuals who are coming to this country sometimes have knowledge, skill, experience, and credentials, and it makes, but they can't find the jobs that meet with that, and are not able to find jobs that are able to pay them commensurate to that experience. Jana Batalova at the Migration Policy Institute has done some amazing research on brain waste, and she's really laid out the amount of money that we're losing every year because individuals can't work with that. But fortunately, individuals can start their own businesses based on their knowledge, experience, skills, the things that they care about, and earn, the earnings that they feel and rightfully deserve based on what they're bringing to the American economy and based on their knowledge and their skills. Finally, there's social capital. When folks who already are here in your community and people can help you out with the process, that's incredibly important for you to be able to start a business. But the thing is, all these things considered, why is it that our immigration system doesn't function this way? And Teresa, you and I both know that BPC sort of has a long theme in its research with the Immigration Project that the U.S. immigration system doesn't really have a mission statement, doesn't really have a purpose. It's kind of just a mass of policies. And oftentimes these policies are not particularly good at trying to attract talent or trying to retain talent, especially when you look at, say a country like Canada, that has been very deliberate, intentional about attracting talent and retaining talent. One of those channels being its own immigrant entrepreneur visa. And I think that that's sort of the conversation where things need to go, is that what is the purpose of the U.S. immigration system? How does economic-based immigration benefit the United States, and what are different ways that we can facilitate that? And I think that kind of conversation can point to attracting talent, folks who want to work here. They may not be entrepreneurs, but they want to work here, or keeping those individuals, whether they're students or maybe they're on an H-1B, but also attracting and retaining individuals whose potential business ideas can be an incredible catalyst for economic change. So I think that that's where the conversation needs to go, which is, what is the purpose of the U.S. immigration system? And then as a part of that conversation, moving it forward. Unfortunately, of course, immigration reform continues to be mired in politics, and Teresa, you and I have had long conversations about that. So that's, I think, the issue is that we need to have the conversation, but then we also need legislation to actually make this reality. And we're just not seeing Congress step up in the ways that they need to. Over the last, at least since 2013, when the last comprehensive immigration reform effort passed in the Senate, but didn't go into the House and was never signed.
Yeah. So let's go from the federal down to the municipal. Christina, back to you. Based on what you have seen in our report, and again, for our viewers, the report is up on our website right now. A link to that will be posted in the YouTube chat. You can also find it by going to bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. But Christina, based on what you've heard from our report, what do you think are some areas that municipalities might be able to improve on to encourage and support immigrant entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I really appreciated the opportunity to review the recommendations, and I'm excited to see how we can use and implement some of the recommendations in our Dallas community. But first off, I want to share from the perspective of Dallas as a local government. We have been working first to use our platforms to just increase awareness of how immigrants really help advance our local economy and help us become a more globally competitive city. So for example, early on in our efforts, we worked with the local Dallas Federal Reserve Bank and also other economic institutions to publish a data report naming that not only are immigrants part of our growth as a city, but also they're 30% of our workforce. They're 30% of our immigrant or entrepreneur base. So just naming those numbers, sharing stories, I think has been really key to help bringing to light that immigrants are part of our city and how we look towards as how we build our progress. And then also, I think the whole idea of how the city, the local municipality can serve as a one-stop shop point. Actually, here in Dallas in December, we opened what we call our Dallas Small Business Center. And this is specifically supposed to serve as a one-stop shop where anyone who wants to start their business, or maybe they've already started their business, whatever phase they are in their business development, they can actually stop with the Small Business Center and get access to information, resources, tutorials. There's also really an emphasis on looking at how immigrant entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs can get access to procurement opportunities. We have a big emphasis on making sure that we have equity in our procurement processes. So that's definitely a big part, because we want to make sure that not only are we investing from the city perspective, our taxpayer money in our city, but we also want to be making sure that we're increasing that access point to entrepreneurs, especially minority groups. This Small Business Center is actually strategically placed within our library, because we know that libraries are one of the few institutions that have sort of that direct contact and have already some established trust with our Dallas residents. Also wanted to echo the idea of community outreach and building trust with community groups. So our Small Business Center has really close relationships with minority contracting organizations and associations, professional groups, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Asian American Chamber of Commerce, African Chamber of Commerce, because we know that without these partnerships, it's really hard for us to make sure that the right people get the right information that they need. In addition, we've also created a mentor protege program that's really designed to connect large businesses, like large prime contractor firms, to provide mutual beneficial assistance to small businesses, including minority-owned businesses and women-owned small businesses. So the goal is to kind of have that one-on-one relationship with large businesses to help those smaller businesses walk through the sometimes complicated process that it takes to become a vendor for the city. Additionally, we've also piloted community navigator programs. These have been mostly under our efforts to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we've seen such great success with this type of outreach that our city councilors are actually looking at how we can institutionalize this method. We recently had an RFP go out to have community organizations actually apply and really see how we can really institutionalize the community navigator system of outreach. Because yes, it's so important that when it comes to building trust, that we actually use and work with trusted messengers, because there is a lot of nuance, especially when it comes to providing services for immigrant residents and making sure that they know what they're eligible for and how to walk through that process of accessing it.
That's great. That's great information and some really, I think, important initiatives that the city is taking. Dane, coming back to you, I mean, you've studied entrepreneurship for many years. What do you think are some important characteristics about immigrant started businesses that make them so successful in many cases?
Thanks, Teresa. Before I answer that question, I just wanted to underscore a couple of points that Christina made. One is on the government procurement and contracting front. This is a really important tool, not just for ensuring that our governments at municipal, state, and federal level work efficiently and have access to innovation, but also for leveraging opportunities for small businesses and entrepreneurs of all kinds. So I really appreciate her mentioning that, and that's something that we've done some work on at BPC. And then secondly, the role of libraries. This is a trend we've seen in a lot of places, leveraging some of those existing assets, libraries being a big one to become really central community spaces. And a lot of them, as Christina discussed, have become really important nodes for small businesses and entrepreneurs in their communities, hosting those technical assistance centers or incubators and accelerators or maker spaces and things like that. So really wanted to draw attention to her points and really appreciate what Dallas is doing there. Teresa, to your point, I think I would point to 2 or 3 things that we see in the research and that we see in the stories that Chris and Adrian have pointed to for why we see such a disproportionate presence of immigrants in not just entrepreneurship, but also, as you point out, successful entrepreneurship. One, which Chris mentioned, would be education. You know, as Chris pointed out, we see immigrant businesses across all sectors and industries: tech, non-tech, services, manufacturing, everything in between. But because, as you have both pointed out, we do not have dedicated pathways for immigrant entrepreneurs, many of those who we do, have the benefit of having in the U.S., come here through a university degree, or and they come here to study, or they grow up here. And so we know, Teresa, as your team has pointed out, that we have a very large share of the foreign-born, in our science and technology and engineering programs, and we know many of them want to stay here. They are not currently able to join companies, but many of them end up staying here and they start companies. And so we see a really high presence of highly educated immigrants, especially in those science and technology fields. That's why we see immigrants found such a high percentage of quote unquote unicorns, these highly valued, privately held tech startups and other venture-backed and equity-backed companies. Another reason that Chris and Adrian both alluded to is a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs, or potential entrepreneurs have very wide and deep social networks to draw on, because we have family-based education system. Many, not all, but many, new immigrants have family members here, or they're coming into communities, well-established immigrant communities. And we know social networks are a key resource, not just for helping entrepreneurs, but for encouraging entrepreneurs to start in the first place. We know from a lot of research that the more entrepreneurs you know, and the more exposed you are to entrepreneurship as an option for you, the higher your propensity is to start a business. And so it kind of feeds on itself in any community, but that's especially what we see among immigrant entrepreneurs in the US, because they have such wide social networks. And that's a key input for entrepreneurs. And the last thing I would point to, and I know there was some research done on this a few years ago, is, again, because we don't have dedicated entrepreneurial pathways for immigrants to the US, and because we have tended to have more of a family-based system, many, again, not all, but many new immigrants come to the US and have the benefit of multi-generational households. And we know that is a key support net for entrepreneurs. We know from other research that government safety nets, whether it's unemployment insurance or other benefits, can increase the likelihood of people starting businesses. We've seen that, for example, in France and other countries. And in the US, what we see in immigrant communities is that often that multi-generational household really serves as that safety net in the absence of some government program. So if you need childcare, you need help with someone who's sick in your household, you often have that resource to draw on. I think we see that borne out in some of the immigrant entrepreneurship experiences.
Well, I'm going to turn back to Adrian, listening to us talk about the research, but who helped you on your entrepreneurial journey? And you mentioned your father, and he started a business, but first of all, who helped you, and what obstacles did you have that you needed help with? You've spent a lot of time growing up in the US, but I imagine you still face some challenges. Adrian, I see you on Zoom, but he can't. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Adrian, so we will hang on a second. Hopefully we'll get him back. There, he's back.
Okay, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
So as Dane mentioned, there's a community to tap into, and that's been incredibly important. And that support system is really, really good. He is right also about the idea that if you see other entrepreneurs who make it happen around you, then you are more encouraged to go ahead and do that. And I have to say that being on my second or third entrepreneurial venture, it becomes easier and easier to do that every single time. You're just that much more prone to doing it. And so there is the infrastructure that exists here, but there is also the rooting for you kind of community. And I was just on a call, actually, interestingly, about this topic last week. I was on a panel, and young immigrant students who want to stay here in the US and build businesses were here and were pitching. And brilliantly, they were students from India, 2 students from India who'd built tech SAS, software as service companies, and they were targeting the owners of many hotels in the US. And perhaps folks that are listening or others on this call know that a large number, more than 50% of owners of some hotel chains happen to be from India. And I knew this, but I was being more and more educated by these young people to say, actually, it's actually deeper than that. It's from this one state. And I said, oh, wow, that's pretty remarkable. And actually, it's even deeper than that. It's from this like one city. And then you think of something like 65% of hotel rooms in the US, and that is a very tight-knit community. And so those on the panel dug a little bit deeper, there are literally personal connections that draw back to the old country, as it were, that will help them network and put their idea into fruition or build their business serving the needs of these hotel owners. And it's connected back to the country that they originated from. And I think that's also incredibly powerful, that we are if you take a step back and look at what we're doing, we're building these nodes with these tentacles all over the world. And in the increasingly difficult to navigate political landscape, geopolitical landscape, economic landscape around the world, the more that entrepreneurs can do what they do, they come to the US and tap those resources and tap those networks and make those connections, the better everyone else is around the world. It's not just a stronger US, but indeed it can make for stronger regional connections that we have, and relationships and partnerships, et cetera, because now you're drawing in so many more people. Never mind, when we talk about things like supply chain, et cetera, which really are so interconnected these days. And so I think of that living ecosystem, if you will, that we as entrepreneurs tap into. And we're talking about other human beings and building with them, building together with them, and the incredible spillover effects that has to society in general, and the connections that can be made both here domestically and internationally with other countries, and bringing those people together to do good. It's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah. So we have a few questions that have come in from the audience, and a couple of them are related. So Chris, I want to turn to you, and maybe Dane, if you have information on this. Some of them are asking about different nationalities and how well they're doing at entrepreneurship in the United States. And Chris, I know you mentioned at the beginning some of the, if you will, lacunae, the missing pieces in our immigration data, but what do we know about different nationalities maybe, and how well they do at entrepreneurship in the United States? And then Dane, if you have any additional information to add.
Right, and the report digs into this. When you look at sort of specific nationalities, individuals who are either from South Asia, Southeast Asia, or East Asia tend to have higher entrepreneurial rates, and tend to have those tight-knit networks, and also have practices that can help them sustain that. In particular, for instance, in Korean American communities, there's the rotating credit system where, a group of individuals, sometimes family members, sometimes a member of a community, will pitch in money into a pot, and then sort of randomly or just kind of in turn order, individuals can access that funding for any particular need. So that's an incredibly important thing to consider with individuals, or at least from East Asia, who are starting business here. Like I said, South Asia, like Adrian's entire conversation about specific communities being represented, that's entirely well seen in the research, that you see individuals from different parts of India who are well represented in different industries. Sometimes it could be chains like franchises for fast food restaurants or hotels. That's certainly something that we see. The one thing, obviously, and to repeat this, is that the data could always be better, and the government doesn't always do a good job of gathering all this data in terms of understanding the individuals, nationality, their business sizes, the history of their businesses. So we have snapshots, but we don't have the full picture.
Yeah. Dane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
The answer to your question, Teresa, is yes, or the audience question is yes, as Chris has mentioned, and the examples that Chris points to. I don't want to cite or try to cite any statistics without having reviewed them first, but we know that's the case. Adrian mentioned, in the hospitality industry, we know that in some communities, for example, I live in Kansas, and we know out in Western Kansas, there's 3 counties that have no majority population anymore. They just have pluralities that have been transformed, especially from immigrants from Latin America, and we've seen them start all sorts of businesses. But again, that's geographically concentrated. We know, Teresa, again, as a function of higher ed, as Chris mentioned, we see concentrations of certain nationalities, from South Asia and East Asia in science and technology and engineering. Again, probably more a function of the ways they're coming into the country and how they're moving through our education system, reflecting that more than any other differences. But the answer is yes, and I know there's research on many other communities. The diaspora networks that Adrian mentions, by the way, that's a really, really important point for the importance of immigrant entrepreneurship here and the broader benefits that we get from it.
Christina, let me turn to you. What are some of the immigrant entrepreneur communities in Dallas that you've encountered? And also, there was a question about Are there other cities that you're aware of that you believe have done a really good job, as I think Dallas has done, to help support immigrant entrepreneurs?
Yeah, thank you. So Dallas actually has a very vibrant, diverse immigrant population. We were actually in 2020 #1 in the country when it comes to immigrant population increase for as a metroplex. So I think it's really definitely a sign that the Dallas area has become a area of opportunity for immigrant residents. But of course, being our proximity to Mexico, a majority of our immigrants come from Mexico and other places in Central America. However, historically, Texas has actually served as one of the states with the biggest Vietnamese population, since we are a state and city that has historically received refugees from on every continent, really. Starting with Vietnamese immigrants, and then also more recently, people from Cambodia, Bosnia, also we have folks from Eritrea, Ethiopia. We also have a really thriving community of immigrants from Africa that really play a big part of our economic development as investors. And then also, more recently, we're receiving, of course, with news that's happening around the world, we've recently, I think, become like #3 when it comes to Afghan refugee resettlement. We received over 2,500 individuals, which is, I think from what I've last heard, is like #3 in the US. So, of course, as a local government, we're always trying to keep tabs on what are the needs. And of course, more recently, we have hired a language access coordinator so that we can make sure that our services are accessible to the language diversity that's available in Dallas. In terms of cities that I think that have done a good job, I mean, it's hard for me to from my competitive spirit, talk about other cities. But, I know that there's a lot of cities and communities in the South and Midwest that have increased their immigrant population. And I think, we tend to think of like some of those traditional gateway cities like New York or Miami. But a lot of times when I talk about integration efforts, I like to sort of highlight how communities in the Midwest and South are actually being innovative when it comes to economically integrating immigrants. So, I mean, I think that's definitely something that I like to share, just because, I think it's something that deserves the recognition that here in the South and Midwest, a lot of times we don't consider, or we have that reputation, but we actually do, as seen by the amount of growth and numbers that are choosing places like Dallas as their new city and home.
Yeah. Another question we have from the audience, maybe Dane or Chris, if you have any thoughts on this one. Has there been any research done on the amount of talent or money the country is losing out by not having a dedicated pathway for immigrant entrepreneurs? Chris, I know in our report, we talked about the ways that people can start businesses. An awful lot of them are, as Christina said, are refugees. So they came through the refugee program or family-based program. But do we have any kind of sense of what we might be losing by not having a dedicated immigrant entrepreneur visa?
Frankly, when we were looking at studies on this, at least we didn't, I think you do see organizations that have put out the economic contribution of immigrant entrepreneurs, but that specific lineage or that question, which is how much we're losing by not bringing in entrepreneurs, I don't think has been explored nearly as much as other issues, in particular, not being able to bring in immigrants with different skills and backgrounds. I've talked about, John, about the lowest work at MPI, about brain waste and the amount of money that you're losing because you don't have individuals working in the industries that reflect their skills, knowledge, credentials, and so forth. But I think that is something that should be looked forward to, but I'm sure Dane might know this a little bit better than I do.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's a lot. We did a study a few years ago, it was probably 7 or 8 years ago, at Kauffman, and on estimating the potential impact of a startup visa. And it was the most recent proposal at that time that was included in the Startup Act. And it was like 2 million jobs a year or something like that. You know, we weren't just guessing, we were using assumptions based on new businesses and their typical job creation, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Adrian, a question for you. I mean, what do you think that immigrant entrepreneurs such as yourself or native-born entrepreneurs can do to help new immigrants who want to start their own businesses?
Great question. There are a few funds, there are a few venture capital funds that are focused on immigrants, and names don't come to mind right now, but capital allocation is absolutely a very important one. Tapping into capital is something that many immigrants, I think, fear or feel like they don't have access to, or they don't know how to work that system. Clearly, it's a lot about networking. And so it's getting to know and build those networks. If you went to Stanford and you worked at Google, you're probably going to be able to raise a good amount of money for your tech startup, right? But if you've come in from Central America somewhere, or Eastern Europe, or another part of the world, and you don't have those networks, it's much more difficult to gain the credibility or to have a chance to have a foot in the door with a VC, to put a pitch deck together, to build it, etc. And so I think that many things that we can do, or folks can do here in the US to help encourage or help make it happen, is really to be a person who comes alongside to carry that burden. And so if you see, or know an immigrant that has an idea, first and foremost, help them disconnect from the safety net, which all of us need to do, which is like, hey, you need to let go of that job, or you need to build this while you're moonlighting, and then let go of that. So some advice and some help and some support along the way, but then simply opening doors, making phone calls on someone's behalf to help them to create a protocol, a prototype rather, to create a prototype, or to get a product out there, or somebody who knows somebody, and through your LinkedIn, they're a buyer at Target, and you can help set up a meeting for this person to go in and pitch. It's things like that we would take for granted here in the US, that come very easily to us, that perhaps others from other countries don't have that confidence, or don't have the connections. And truly, if you have an idea, if you have a really good idea that's worthwhile and is worth commercializing, then oftentimes it does come down to the network. And do you know someone that can help you get that first account, sell that first store, or that first whatever it is, and things can continue to happen from there. So I would think that we just need to be cognizant, purposeful about what we're doing, intentional about helping others and helping others to start a business, and thinking above and beyond ourselves to how we can lend a helping hand, pick up the phone and make a phone call on someone's behalf.
Yeah, Christina, I saw you nodding a lot to what Adrian was saying. Is that similar to the experiences you had in trying to talk with immigrants in Dallas about what needs they have? And we had a question come in from David Humphrey about whether there were surprises from the research. And one of his aspects was, did you have any surprises in talking to immigrant entrepreneurs where you thought they might need something and they're like, actually, what I really need is this?
Well, in my experiences in talking with immigrant entrepreneurs and understanding what some of the challenges they experience is really just most of my experience has been with immigrant entrepreneurs who, I guess, like according to the report, would be Main Street companies, right? Some of those small business owners that really contribute to the vibrancy of our neighborhoods. And so, most of my experience has been really kind of shockingly seeing how a lot of times these are vulnerable entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're put in very vulnerable situations, especially when it comes to funding or, getting into risky loans. And so, I think for me, one of the biggest things has been, trying to advocate for more increased financial literacy, increased, the venture capital opportunities. So, that's one thing that we're trying to identify with our small business center, is seeing how we can make sure there's just more clear information about what funding opportunities are available, what institutional supports are available. I think also from my experience too is how important some of those relationships are when it comes to making sure folks get that information. I get probably an email once a week from someone who is either starting their business or they've already started their business because somebody heard that we have an office that supports immigrants. And so I think sort of like that name or that reputation helps immigrants feel safe in asking their questions that sometimes they might be afraid to ask. So, one of the things that I've been trying to work on with our entrepreneur supports is how can we brand these services and this information to be very explicit. I think in the report, it does talk about some language that we could be using to sort of, help people know what's available to them. For example, including language about ITIN numbers and, having information obviously in different languages. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that regard. And I think though I'm really happy to see that we're having these kinds of conversations because, this is definitely a topic that I know a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs have a lot of questions about. A lot of leaders may not be aware about the issues that a growing number of their entrepreneurs face. So I think this is definitely the first step to addressing those challenges.
Yeah. So we are at the end of our time. I want to thank all of our panelists, and Dane Stangler had to jump a little bit early, but Christina Da Silva, Chris Ramon, Adrian Bota, thank you so much. Once again, you can find this report on our website at bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. You can find out more about our immigration project at that link and find out more about the Bipartisan Policy Center at bipartisanpolicy.org, including other events coming up that you can watch or attend in person, because we are now starting to do some in-person events. So thank you very much to everyone who joined us today, and have a great day.